I actually have a remote, so that's pretty good. Yeah, I take you through the entire course, maybe some of its history, and if anyone has any questions while I'm speaking, just yell it out. You don't have to wait till the end or anything. The first book, the Boston Marathon History by the Mile, each town has their own chapter in the book, and within that has any anecdotes, lead changes, landmarks, statues, fun things, how to train, how to run in that section. And the new book is basically about 200 photos, color and some black and white, tracing the whole history in addition to some fun things throughout the course too. So I kind of combined both with this. This is actually the last year. Ooh, I love the pointer. This is last year. I took this at the finish as the clouds were coming in. Hopefully it'll be good weather this year. As you know, I'll give you a brief history. In 1896, for the modern Olympic Games in Greece, the Boston Athletic Association, the BAA, sent some of their athletes to compete. One of the events was the marathon. At the time, it was about 24 miles. And the BAA members really enjoyed that race, and they brought that idea back to their BAA games. There was a track oval behind where the Boston Public Library is, no longer there now, Irvington Street Oval. And they had a series of events, and they wanted to end their BAA games with this marathon. So that's how it started in 1897, the following year. And I'll get to that when I get to Ashland and Hopkinton and everything. This is the athletes' village that you see on TV a lot, and you'll see in a few weeks. Everyone comes here. You stay there for about 3 or 4 hours, all the runners. And then from here, it's 7/10 of a mile to the starting line. It's behind the high school in Hopkinton. In the Centennial race in 1996, this was all mud. If everyone remembers from being here in 96, it snowed like a day or two before Boston. So all of this was covered with snow. So Dave McGilvey, the race director, had a great idea that he had about 2 or 3 Army helicopters hovering about 100 feet above the ground to dry it off, which I thought was pretty ingenious. I forget to keep asking him if he ever told the neighbors about that. Imagine waking up, and they're pretty loud. And all of us wore little Stop and Shop plastic bags on our feet so we wouldn't get all muddy and everything. So that was kind of fun. Everyone's sliding around, getting to Hopkinton. This one's interesting. As I talk about it, look at this gentleman here, if anyone can guess who that is. I took this probably about 10 years ago. This is Hopkinton Center, the great sign here that everyone loves to get their picture taken in front of. This row of houses is Hayden Row Street. For 20 years, from 1965 to 85, the start was actually on this street, and the runners would have to run and then take a turn onto Main Street and go that way. So all the ones, basic, our generation, the Bill Rogers, Wynn, Joan Benoit Samuelson, Bob Hall, the wheelchair athlete, basically started on that side street, which they don't do anymore now. So can anyone guess who this is? Extremely famous? No, close. This is actually Frank Shorter. Frank Shorter won the 1972 gold medal in the Olympics, which basically started the running boom and the interest of running marathons in this country. So he just walked by me and just lied down there and started resting. He was mic'd up for Channel 5, so he was running the race and giving stories and updates. But I'm just looking around and go, here's one of our greatest marathoners, and no one is paying attention to him, which I thought was just interesting. I got to know him over the years, and I showed him this photo at Falmouth, and he was next to Catherine DeRaba and Bill Rogers and Mev Keflezighi. And like a little kid, he gets the 8x10. He goes, look, I'm actually doing what I'm telling people to do. Look, I'm actually lying down. And Mev and them are looking at him like, yeah. You've been doing this for like 30 years. The actual start was a little different prior to what it is now. For years, as you know, it started at noon. Gun went off. Everyone, man, woman, child, started. And you also went from curb to curb. They just crammed all of us, curb to curb. And it was like a natural bottleneck at the start. So when you started way back here, the street where the actual starting line is more narrow. So you would run for like 20 feet and stop, run for 20 feet and stop. And also back then, when the gun went off at noon, if it took you 10, 15 minutes to cross the starting line, you were 10 or 15 minutes into your time. This is before the CHIPS technology. So what the BAA used to do, I don't know how many people would run this back then, is they would mail you a little index card and would give you an amount of time to deduct based on what they thought it took you to get to the starting line. You remember that? That was pretty awesome. I wish they still did that. Hey, take 10 minutes off. In 1987 or 88, I think it was 87, if you remember, there was a few athlete accidents that changed how this race is run now. If you remember the wheelchair athletes, there was photos of them crashing into each other and going off the road. Well, what happened was there's a little part, I'll show you later, of the starting line that goes down a little bit right after the start. And it was sort of slick. They had just paved that section of the road, and there was a slickness that morning. And the wheelchairs back then were more like those hospital wheelchairs, more vertical, so it wasn't aerodynamic. And they slid and slid into each other. So since that year, well, I'll get ahead of myself, about 10 minutes later for the athletes to start, same race, back then they would have a volunteer at each side on the curb holding a rope in front of the front runners. And the race director would give a countdown, 10, 9, 8, and they would drop the rope and sort of, get the rope. Well, that year, the same year, they didn't do it quick enough, and the gun went off, and the runners came over, and they tripped over the rope on one side. Same race. So Dave McGilvery, who was the technical director at the time, who's now the race director, the BAA told Dave, can you sort of fix that at all? See what's going on? So what he did is for the wheelchair athletes, he had a vehicle in front of the wheelchair athletes. The gun went off for them the following years, and they would have to coast down behind this vehicle, and there's a line painted where the hill sort of ends. Then the wheelchair athletes could just go and race. But they had to go down that hill without racing in the same grid. Maybe 2 years ago, the athletes said, can we stop doing that? We're pretty good now. We got better wheelchairs. So now they don't do that anymore. The wheelchair athletes start the race right from the beginning. And for the runners, what Dave thought was, which he still does, instead of having a rope, he has volunteers shoulder to shoulder in front of everyone, which you usually see on TV. And as the countdown comes, the volunteers go to the sidewalk, so there's no more rope. So Dave always jokes that because he did that, he got the job as race director. I'm like, is that good or bad? And the bottleneck, because he's also a runner too, so he kind of knows these little tricks too. What he did for that was he measured different parts of Main Street. The widest part is 89 feet, or 85 feet. The most narrow is 39 feet. And of course, the most narrow is where the start line is. So he measured 25 feet, and he has police fencing that you see now, 25 feet in width going all the way down Main Street. So even if you're I remember when you first started, I'm thinking, well, I'm farther back down here as I'm running. I'm going to take me longer, but it didn't. Because it's 25 feet, all the way from start to way down here, you kind of got through very quickly. So that was a good thing that he did for that. He was able to figure all these little logistics out, which is nice. This is kind of interesting, too. There's plenty of it in Hopkinton for tourists as well, or if you're a runner and you want to sort of relax and check out the town. There's plenty of statues. This is Ash Street right here. And right down in front of the school, the former school, is the Team Hoyt statue with Rick and Dick Hoyt, which everyone knows their great story. George V. Brown right here is one of the starters of the starting pistol. Every year but one since 1905, a Brown family member has started the race, which is excellent. So this statue is sort of lined up to the start. Marathon Way is what they renamed the little section in front. And also, you can sort of see it here, but this is the BAA office. Right, that little yellow right there is a cutout of a unicorn that each day it gets closer to the marathon, the unicorn comes out a little bit farther and farther. Until Patriots Day, if you look up, it fills the whole window, which is kind of cool. So, I'm assuming it's a cutout, not a real one. But hey, you never know. The actual start line, which is great. I tell people from out of state or different countries who ask me about seeing the start line that the police will actually stop the traffic so you can get your picture taken. This is the weekend of. They love it. So instead of, Boston drivers. The police actually stop traffic for you if you want your picture taken at the starting line. I speak quickly, sorry. I'm the youngest of three. You guys talk fast. Which is neat. This is the weekend before, the weekend of the marathon, so they have vendors and stuff. Don't eat any fried food if you're running. So you can actually do this, which you can't do in a lot of other places, like New York, unless you want to go to Staten Island and get your picture taken on a bridge and take your chances. They'll actually stop it for you, which is great. So it's neat that they have that. This thing, a lot of people may run by this, as you can see all the runners looking straight ahead. But at the 1 mile mark is this statue called the Spirit of the Marathon at 1 mile. This gentleman right here is Stylianos Kyriakidis, the Greek who won Boston in 1946. And there's an exact replica of the statue in Greece as well. For the 2004 games that were in Greece, this statue was created. to honor Stylianos. In 1946, Greece was just decimated after the war, and he had known Boston, Johnny Kelly. He had run Boston before and didn't do well. So he used this race after he won to get supplies and food for Greece. Stayed here for about a month or two, sort of like a tour of getting some materials. And he actually brought like literally bus loads of materials to Greece, food, funding, really helped out, clothing and everything. So they honored him here for the 1946 win. And it's a long story. His son Dimitri is part of it, and Tim Kilduff, the 26.2 Foundation, tried to get it at the start, I think at the finish line in Greece, and that mayor didn't want it. So then they went to the starting line. That mayor said, okay, you can do that. Then the mayors changed, and the new mayor said, well, no, you got to put a statue of Spiridon Louis, who won the 1896 marathon at the Olympics, another Greek. And the artist was like, you know how long it takes to make a statue? But he thought it, good ingenuity. Right here is a statue of Spiridon Louis that he created and basically stuck to the side of Stelios, which was already created. And if you notice, his feet don't touch the ground. And that's how you get the spirit of the marathon title, because Stelios is running with the spirit of Spiridon Louis with him. So that's how that was created. That's how you kind of got around it. So there's another one in Greece. But people don't notice this when you're running because, you're 1 mile in. You've been ready for the marathon for how many months? A year, maybe. This is, everyone keeps forgetting, not everyone, but how much of a hill. This is what I was talking to you about the wheelchairs. It really goes downhill. And right about here where it starts to level off is where that line was that they painted that the wheelchair athletes could actually just take off. But this is, it's a tough start if you're not prepared because, you've been in Hopkinton for like 3 hours. You're jacked up, you're ready to go. You've been training for months. You've been, running through lunch, picking up your kids. Your whole life has been changed, and you're ready to go. And the gun goes off, and you just fly the first mile. Probably you could do your fastest mile, which you really shouldn't do. But you're ready. You're excited. There's helicopters, there's balloons, there's announcements. It's excellent. The bikers here singing songs. They've been there since 4 in the morning. Because once you have to get there early because when the roads close. So if you want to get on this side of the marathon, you better get there early. So it's really exciting going into this, and hopefully it's a good day. Ashland itself, this is about a mile from the actual course. Crow's Flight, about a mile. This is the spot where the marathon actually started in 1897 and 1898. When the BAA tried to find a course, they wanted to originally replicate Paul Revere's ride and add a few miles. But they kind of didn't know where. If you remember from your high school history class, he actually started in Cambridge, went over the water, jumped on a horse, so they really couldn't figure that out. So they couldn't go eastward. They didn't want to go to New Hampshire. So they followed the train line all the way and just waited until it was 24 to 24 and a half miles, 25 miles, depending who you read. And it ended here in Ashland. There used to be a Metcalfe's Mill was here. They made boxes for shoes at the Sudbury River here. It burned down in the 30s, but you can see the base of the building here. Since then, Ashland has made this the Marathon Park. There's nice informational plaques here about the history of the first 27 years of the race that was in Ashland. You can actually run a race where the first starting line was. The road, this is Pleasant Street. The road was a little configured different, but basically kind of the same. It's really good to go to if you want to visit it. There's actually, I have another picture in the book. If you keep going down to the bottom of the photo, near the railroad tracks, there's a post that says B25 to signify Boston, 25 miles. So that's still there. The Amtrak is on the left side. That's the rail line that they followed. And if you see the old photos of mile markers back in the day, 10 3/4 miles, 7 7/8. That wasn't for the runners, obviously. That was for the officials who would get off on the train, go to there with the little clipboards, mark who the runners are coming by, get back on the train, go to the next stop. That was for them. That's why I had these weird configurations of mile markers. It wasn't for the runners. How do you train? Hey, I'm at 7 3/4, great. So the first 2 years were here, and then the BEA finally built their clubhouse, which was kind of between the Boston Public Library and that oval. Again, that's no longer there. But they wanted the marathon to finish in front of their clubhouse. So now they had to adjust the starting line because the finish line was now going to be in front of the clubhouse, which was down Exeter Street. So they just went backward until there's a bridge right off the photo here, High Street Bridge. So for the next 8 or 9 years, it started there on that bridge. and then ran right down here. Then about 8 or 9 years later, there was maybe 100 runners, and oh my God, the bridge can't hold it. So they moved it again to actually Main Street, 135. The current 4-kilometer mark of the race is the last spot where the start was in Ashland. So that was, there was a farm there in the old days. So when you run over the 4-kilometer mark or drive over it, that was the last spot. And then when the distance increased to 26.2 miles, they just went back until 26.2, which happened to be Hopkinton. And that changed because of the Olympics when the, for the Royal Box in the 1908 Olympics, they wanted, the King and Queen wanted to see it finish and start in front of the Windsor Castle and finish in the track, so they extended it to 26.2 miles. And Frank Shorter always jokes when he runs a marathon, when he gets to about 24, 25 miles, he always curses the royalty. It would have been done by now. So, and actually the BAA didn't really take to it too quickly because that was 1908 for the games, and it universally changed to 42 kilometers. And for Boston, that wasn't until the 1924 race. So we're a little behind, but hey, we're still here. This is entering Framingham, getting closer to here. 5 miles is right here. It's a nice little hill going up. The roads get wider, which is nice. Start getting your pace. First few miles, very tight. You see all those great shots on TV, all a bunch of runners. So you kind of get your spacing here, which is great. Every time I put this photo up, I always listen for moans, which means those people ran this. This is around the 10-kilometer mark where the runners come around here, and they come straight down. The water station's right behind me. It's 6 miles or 10 kilometers. This was 2 years ago, the very cold, windswept rain that was horrible. I did not run this one, thankfully. The closest I got to this was in 06, where they had that hurricane that came through. That was the closest the race was going to be canceled, Dave said, because it was just a real heavy hurricane that just kept lingering into the morning of the race. But it wasn't this cold. It was very heavy rain, the big thick raindrops. It wasn't as cold as this. This was chilly for everyone. You can see all the red skin. But you can also see what works for everybody. Look at some with hats, some don't, some have jackets, some don't. This is only 6 miles in. Looks like they're in, you know, Brookline or Kenmore Square. It's a marvel that these people did this that year. But the weather is obviously a factor in April in New England. Could be anything. It snowed for a couple of years. This is huge, dense fog. This was the year that the helicopters were grounded because of the fog. So what the helicopters do is they bounce the satellite off when you watch it on TV. So for this year, all the coverage was ground-based cameras, if you remember, because the helicopters couldn't fly. So there was no coverage. So it's been real bad with dense fog. This is the Athletes Village. This is down the road, as you know. Natick Fire Department right here always has this with the water. But this is 2012. If anyone had run 2012, this was the one that was, the temperature was in the high 80s and 90s. The BEA actually said that week, if you want to defer until the next year, if you don't think you can handle the heat, we're going to allow you to defer the next year. Don't worry about qualifying. My cousin deferred, and I made fun of him, and I ran it in like 7 hours and something, and called him and said, yeah, I should have deferred. I was like, not a good day. Whether, I think it was Natick or Wellesley, by the time I got there, the bank time temperature thing said 91. When I got there, I'm like, yeah, I really needed to know that. I was this close to going into JP Lex, but I didn't. This here is one of those hazmat tunnels that they rolled out, the fire department, where there's water shooting in from the roof and everything for firefighters to clean their equipment. So I figured this would be great for a picture. I'm not running. I'm walking. I ran and walked. I actually was not dehydrated because I ran and walked from the beginning. I was hurting. My muscles needed more water because they were cramping. But a lot of runners I would notice would run. They ran their pace until they felt tired, and then it would start to adjust. But by that time, it's too late. You always need like plan A, B, C. But for a day like this, you just run to survive. You want to enjoy yourself too. You don't want to. Anyone see the War of the Worlds movie with Tom Cruise, and he's running, and the people next to him getting zapped and just disintegrate? It was the most frightening thing running this marathon, and runners were just falling. It was really frightening for that. Fortunately, every half mile, every mile or so is the medical tent, and before they even hit the ground, medical people were there throughout this whole course. Because they have binoculars and they look. Once in a while, I'll go to a medical tent to get a paper towel or some Vaseline for chafing or something, and they already have my number written down as I'm going toward the tent, because they don't know why I'm going toward the tent. And I'll just get that stuff, and they'll write it down, and they'll let the next tent know, hey, bib number such and such got Vaseline or stopped by, just to let you know. So they are very good with that. It is unbelievable. I always joke, if you're going to have a medical thing, have it on this, because the amount of medical personnel in this 26-mile area is amazing, and the guys are at a high level of assistance. It's amazing. This is Framingham as well, the train station. Train tracks parallel the road pretty much, most of it, and they beep and everything, which is great. It's kind of fun to hear it. And the roads are very wide here, which is great through Framingham. There are block parties here, and as a runner, at this point, you start to smell the Italian sausages, which smell awesome. But don't have any, especially Kenmore Square. Don't have an Italian sausage. You really want one. They smell so good, but don't. The tracks here have an interesting story. One year back in, I think it was 1908-ish area, that Thomas Longboat, who ended up winning it, was in the lead with about 4 or 5 other runners, and they started to hear the train getting closer and closer, which they do anyway, but it wasn't stopping. So what they did is they ran a little faster over the tracks, and they looked behind them, and the train actually cut across the course back then. So all the other runners had to wait for the train to go by, which was like 100, at that point 100, maybe 80 or 90 runners, and those 6 who went beyond it obviously loved it. They just said, thank you, take your time, and that's where the winners came from. So I always joke with Dave McGillivray if that's ever going to happen, because this is a commuter rail train. They go through there. He goes, no, I have the schedule. They don't do that. Are you sure? They don't. Getting closer, you get little hills like this, but your training will get over that momentum anyway. You don't think there's a hill like that, but that's not too bad. I kind of put this in because I get a kick out of being from New England, that the town line from Natick, when one town paves their road, they stop right here. I just love that. No one does it at the same time, right? Don't they do it in the spring? One town has a shoulder over here, the other one, I don't know, I just get a kick out of this. New Englanders get it, out-of-staters go, what are you talking about? I'm like, nah, it's us. But you get some great high fives from the kids and everything, they really pull you through. And the neighbors, you start to see barbecues, and if you run this year after year, like I said, I ran from 1990 to 2012, 23 years in a row. I saw kids grow up. Same with Falmouth, too. It's generational. It's amazing how you just see these kids. What's kind of funny is that you would see kids, high school kids, play in their band on the driveway, and each year they would get better. You'd say, you guys are better than last year. Yeah. It was hysterical. Another thing people don't get if you're out of state, I'm running when they have the socks, and they're like, what's a sock? Sock. I go, oh, it's a baseball game in Seattle's inning, and if they don't know baseball, forget it, don't even try to explain it. But you'll start to see, well, it's different now. When the race started at 12, it was done so that the leaders would get through Kenmore Square about the time the game would be let out. So you get another 30,000 runners, fans in Kenmore Square. Now you have starting from like 9:30 to 11:30, I think is the last wave. The game, it's a little different. It's not as timed, but it's still the same for fans. And throughout the course, you will get this is just one of them. You'll get kids with little flashcards or the radio's on. It's great. You'll start hearing Red Sox scores. So for us locals, it's excellent that you'll start hearing that. This is Natick still, as most of you know from around here. And the lake over here is a great story. In the old days, there was no guardrail, and the road was configured a little different back in the 20s and 30s. Tarzan Brown, who had won this twice, the legend is that he, on a hot day, jumped into the water, cooled off, and continued running. What he actually did was he sat on the edge here, took his shoes off to cool his feet down, because if you runners know in the heat, your feet expand, you swell up. So he had friction with his shoes. So that's what he did. But I like both stories. I tell them both. And there's also a gentleman over here. I don't know if he still does it. I mentioned this once in Natick, and everyone laughed at me. People start fishing in a good way. They laughed at me. They fish off this, which is nice during the race, but there's always a canoe right off the photo here. There's a guy in a canoe fishing. His back is always toward us. Every year. I tell you, 23 years, he was just fishing. He never turns around. He keeps fishing. And people who would run this over time go, this guy never turns around. He hates us. I'm like, dude, turn around. There's like 30,000 people behind you. And someone in Natick, when I mentioned this a year or two ago, said, maybe it's one of those Walt Disney animatronic things. I'm like, I think so. It's like the same guy. He never liked us. I don't know why. Now you're entering Natick, 10-mile marks right here. This building's a little different. Legion's not there anymore. But what's great is that you could hear the flag wave in the wind. And I don't know if this gentleman does it right before this building. There's a little space, and there'd be a flatbed, the back of a flatbed truck, and this guy would be singing like Elvis and Neil Diamond songs, and he'd get into it. You could hear him before you get to him. Really good voice, but he'd wear like the Neil Diamond sequin purple high-collared shirt with the chest hair, and he's dancing. It was pretty cool. So you start to dance here when you hear the music. This is really good because people are getting closer to you. Some of the streets are so wide, but the spectators really get close. It kind of carries you through. 10 miles, you should feel good as a runner anyway. But it's to help you on a bad day. It started to rain. You can tell by the clouds later. This tower here, this is the church, so the fire department's right on the other side of it, for those of you who may not know the Natick area. This will get your bearings. Also in Natick, and I never found out who it was, there's a gentleman who I'm assuming is an engineer, and every year he would build something on a flatbed in between the houses, and that's where the family would watch the race. This year it was the green monster, the Coke bottle, and the foul pole, and there they are sitting on top of it. One year it was the Zakin Bridge. The year the Zakin Bridge was built, he built the Zakin Bridge, and people were sitting on the road. Eiffel Tower one year. One year he sort of replicated the house without the front, like a dollhouse, and they're sitting on the ceiling watching us. It was really cool. I hope he still does it. Although maybe 2 years ago in the rain he didn't. But yeah, so this is Natick. I think it's right after the center. You'd always have something like that, so which is pretty cool. And then this is just before coming here. The first year I ran this, I always wear a hat, like I said, so my head's down a little bit. I don't see everything in front of me until I put my head up. Going up this hill, it's not a bad hill. I mean, it's still early enough. But as I'm just going up the hill, I noticed the first year I ran, this guy wearing real bright black shoes with this white, foam and red pants. And I'm looking up, and it was Santa with a jacket and everything. And this guy. I'm going, wow. And he's going, you boys and girls have been good this year, and telling all of us, I'm going, thank you. And I told my friends who also ran that year, and no one had saw him, because I was on this side of the race, they were on this side. So they thought I was hallucinating. I'm like, it's like 10, 11 miles. I can't be hallucinating 11 miles. I hope not. So the following year, I brought a camera with me and went on the sidewalk, not this photo, but want to get a picture of him. So you remember the Christmas Story movie with Peter Billingsley? So I'm walking up the sidewalk, and from behind him comes this little guy wearing green with little bells on his shoes that pointed up, a hat with a bell. I'm going, whoa, I didn't see this guy last year. Maybe I am hallucinating. So I walk up to him, he goes, would you like your like, are you real? I'm poking him, he goes, yeah, okay. So I got the picture and showed my friends, and they believed me at that point. This is 2012, actually, and he's got like a Santa snowman design shirt, and he took his jacket off. So he still did this in 2012, and it was like 90. I took this for the book, because I wasn't really, as I said, I wasn't running as much. I was walking more than running that year. I hope he still does it. I think he missed a year or two, someone told me. I spoke in Natick a year or two ago. But look for him. It's awesome. It's Santa Claus in April. So, but that's part of enjoying the race as a runner too, and a spectator. You see Santa Claus. Now we're approaching more familiar ground for everyone. There's the town line. There's the pavement change again. Well, they extend a little bit more here than Natick. Wellesley is halfway in the course, 13 miles in center town, 13.1. The halfway of any marathon, as a runner will tell you, is about 20 or 21 miles running-wise. But as far as distance-wise, Wellesley is halfway. The campus is on your right, as you tell right here. For those of you who may not know the area, the campus is right here, and there's a sign that everybody steals. Right about here is when you can actually hear women cheer. You can actually hear the low din of them cheering. For those of you who don't know that, at Wellesley College, there was what was called the scream tunnel on both sides. Women would be on either side. They don't do that anymore. They're only on one side. But the scream tunnel nickname because women were on both sides of you as you ran for years. And they would just cheer and cheer and cheer for about a quarter of a mile in front of Mungar Hall over here. And they knew Wellesley, somebody in the first year in 1897. There was a Harvard runner. So every year, except for one, when the marathon fell on Easter break, they've been out there cheering. because in the old days, up until the late 60s, the Boston Marathon was run on Patriots Day, April 19th, whatever day that was in the week. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, that was the Boston Marathon. It wasn't until 68, 69, with Amby Burford won in 1968, that's the third Monday in April. But prior to that, it was whatever day it was, except for a Sunday, then they would move it. So if one year went on an Easter break, so they weren't cheering because they weren't there. But so in the old days, you'd have women on both sides, and it's deafening. And I remember people from out of state, because when you're running, you bump into people, and they would say, "Oh, is there a train coming?" Because there's a train still on your left-hand side. And I'd say, "Well, yeah, that could be a train, but that's probably the women." It's unbelievable. It's amazing. Now they're just on this side since the 1996, the centennial, when they were going to have 38,000 runners. They put the big fencing really started to come into effect in 1996. The chip timing was the first year where runners had a little chip on their shoelaces. So when you cross the starting line, that's when your time started. That started in 1996. Now it's on your bib. So they just had the women on the right side because they had more fencing in 96. And then since the bombing, they've really stretched things out because the race is only permitted from curb to curb on the inside. So the BAA, the feds, and the state want to know everybody who's on the road inside the curb. Runners, volunteers, the water, everything. So they kind of push things out a little bit for safety. One thing that the women do now is these little banners and everything, which is kind of neat. Several years ago, they started this. You could contact them on social media. Say you're in Texas and your son is running, but you're not going to be there. You'd say, "Hey, my son Johnny's running. Can you put a sign?" And they spend a couple of weeks creating these signs. So you could be running, and all of a sudden you see a sign from your parents that you never knew. It's amazing what they do right along this whole stretch. And a funny male-female thing I'll tell you, and I'll preface this by saying that we're not that smart, guys. All right? The cheering that you get really does fill you up. You kind of run differently. It's amazing the support you get when you hear that. That's why you'll see, this photo especially, you'll see the guys, what we'll do is we'll throw our chest out, we're really tall, "Hey, how's it going? We're doing really good, get the kiss, do this, run over," and we'll run probably our fastest half mile, stupidly. Whereas the women will still enjoy everything, but they know to maintain their pace. They'll still high-five, they'll still enjoy everything, they'll get their kiss, they'll do whatever they want, but they're smarter running. We aren't. We're not that smart. And this photo, you see all the guys, they didn't run like this the whole time. But look at her. She's got good stride. She's focusing. She's enjoying it. Right? There's your difference. I always got a kick out of that. Every year, I'd see that. Now, coming down to the falls is entering Newton. 128 right around the corner. 16-mile markers right here. This is really the first hill coming down as a runner. And if you don't know that, you're going to feel it in about a mile. Bill Squires, who was the first Greater Boston Track Club coach, he coached basically every American who won Boston in the 70s and 80s, he coached. Bill Rogers, Greater Boston Track Club, Greg Meyer, Beryl Salazar, Dick Beardsley, who came in second to Salazar, Bob Hall, the wheelchair athlete, were all coached by Bill Squires. And he had a trick, because back then in the 70s, where running was just starting, the running boom was just starting. The runners would kind of stay in the middle of a road and just follow the double yellow, because they figure, well, I'll just follow that. Or in the big marathon, the blue line, which we don't have a blue line. I asked Dave why we don't have a blue line. He joked. He said, "Well, that'd just be for one day out of the year." He goes, "If we had that the rest of the year, drivers in Massachusetts can't deal with the yellow and white line. You got to throw a blue line in there?" I'm like, "That's a good point." So especially in the New England area, because of the rain and everything, the center of the road has the crown, so the water would drift off. It's just not good for runners. So Coach wanted to explain to his guys how to cut the tangents. In other words, you want to cut the corners as quick as close as you can. You're not going to run like a truck and run wide like this. You want to cut the tangents, what's called. So he brought all his great guys, Rogers and Meyer, at this hill behind me when I took this picture with a tennis ball. And he put the tennis ball on top of the hill and just let it go. And he told the runners, follow that tennis ball. The tennis ball is going to come down this hill with the least resistance. It's going to go here. It's not going to go over here and go wide. Just to get a visual in their head. Everyone does it now. You'll see runners, they'll line up behind each other and they'll cut the tangent, they'll go this way. Well, they didn't do that in the 70s much. So Coach was really big on getting that into their head to do that. And this is where he did that big thing with the tennis ball, because this is the first real hill before you even get to 128. If you run this and don't even know that, your legs are going to feel it going down. especially with 128 where the hill goes over 128. And people will beep at you, which is nice. I was telling somebody earlier, either they're beeping at you because they can't use that exit, or they're supporting you. I go, so go with the support, because you'll feel a breeze underneath, but you'll hear them beep, which is kind of neat on 128. So when you come to the fire station, so from 128 to the fire station is about 1.5 miles. From Wellesley Hospital to the fire station is a nice level mile. Then you turn right at the fire station and start the succession of hills to get to Boston College. This one is at 19.1 miles to Johnny Kelly statue, which this is Walnut Street here, for those of you who know the area. Comm Ave, this is the course. This statue is actually dedicated here, on the other side of Walnut Street. But a few months later, a car hit it and broke its arm, so they had to repair it, and they go, well, let's put it over here. So they put it on this side, about 80 feet in, facing the same way as the runners, which you can't really see it when you're running, you can't see it. There's like a sausage truck in front of it. It's on your, it's just, I wish it was up here facing you, or another mile, because Heartbreak Hill is at around 20.5 miles. It's another mile, but hey, I didn't design it. So it's interesting that you'll see this. It's kind of neat to look forward to that. If you strain your head, you can see it. But what's neat about these hills, I was telling somebody earlier, there's enough flat in between each hill. Another thing that Coach Squires did, the Kenyans do this all the time, and the Americans did in the 70s and 80s when he would teach them this, because they would train on this. Greater Boston Track Club started at BC, so they would use these roads to train on, is that say Bill Rogers or Salazar or whatever was coming around that fire station, had somebody in second and third right behind him. Well, he would run up the hill, because like coaches say, you can't beat a hill, you got to run up the hill your normal pace. But with the flat, he would use his intervals, which would be faster running and training, and try to separate with the guy in second. So use that flat to run really fast, and then you get to the next hill. Guy in second, who's now farther back, said, oh, I got to catch Bill, runs up to Bill on the hill, gets to the next hill. Bill Rogers runs fast on the flat. Guy in second goes, I got to catch Bill. So by the time he gets to BC area, or Heartbreak Hill, the guy in second and third, their legs, if they're not used to it, are shredded, and Bill Rogers just keeps going. Giulino Bordin did this in 1990, the Italian, because he was used to training in the mountains of Italy. At the fire station, he was 2.5 minutes behind Yuma Hikanga at the fire station at mile 17. By the time he got to BC, he was shoulder to shoulder and just passed him. That's 2.5 minutes. He did the same thing Bill did. Just ran fast on the flat, kind of relaxed on the hill, fast on the flat, and just how he just worked away at everybody. The story behind the statue of the Heartbreak Hill is interesting as well. In 1935, Johnny Kelly won the Boston Marathon. So for 1936, he was obviously favored. We all love him. So he was behind Tarzan Brown around here, 19, 20-mile mark area. So around 20.5 miles, Johnny caught up to Tarzan Brown and sort of tapped him on the back and said, kind of like, this is my race, thanks again. Sort of woke up Tarzan, who just basically took off. He was a great marathoner, and he won, and Johnny came in 5th. Jerry Nason, who was a sports writer for the Globe, who was covering the race for decades, reported in the paper that whole incident and said that move broke Johnny's heart, and it morphed into Heartbreak Hill. And if you ever talked to Johnny before he passed, he would always say, he came in second place 7 times, he would say, half of those I could have won. That one I could have won if I just kept going. Because if you ever catch somebody, you don't stop. You don't relax. You keep going. Use your momentum. Again, this should be up a mile, but it's a great statue. It's Johnny, the older version, holding hands with the younger version. It's a neat statue to do, to see that there. It's the top of BC. It's the top of Heartbreak Hill, 21 miles, Gaston Hall at Boston College, and you start going down to Lake Street here. If you ever see the elite athletes sort of drop off around 20, 21 miles without an injury, just sort of drop off, they're doing that for a reason. With the Olympic trials, you saw that for some of the elite athletes. If they're in like 15th, 20th place here and they're just feeling that it's just not their day, it's not worth it, they'll stop here, and for them it's a training run for 20, 21 miles. It saves them to run another marathon within a month. Elite athletes really only do 2 a year, one in the spring, one in the fall. You can run more, but it's competitive, and that's your job. You do basically 2. So if they're in 15th or 20th place with 5 miles to go, and they push it and come in 18th place, well, they've used their spring marathon. So you'll see runners, elite athletes drop off. The Olympic trials, that happened a few. They just said, no, I'm not, the top 3 make the Olympic Games, the U.S. trials last week. I'm not going to make it. They stopped around 2021 so they can save themselves and run again. Bill Rogers always jokes, there's a medical tent here. He joked that this is his favorite place to stop and get out of the race. He was half joking. The elite athlete of Bill Rogers was saying that because, like the story I just told you about stopping. But also the first Boston he started, he stopped here, didn't finish. In 2009, when he ran again years later for charity, he stopped here and didn't make it in. So he was half kidding. And he went to BC too, got his degree there. So that's the area that he was sort of talking about. It's a great place to see Gaston Hall in BC and the towers. You're like, I'm so far into the race now. This is great. I have 5 miles to go. And this is the other side of the hill coming down. Lake Street is on this side. Entering Brighton. Moore Hall is a little bigger. They knocked this building down, so it looks a little different. It's a cemetery mile right about here. It's what they call it. Right around the corner is Evergreen Cemetery. And Dave McGivery tells the story a lot. The first year he ran Boston Marathon, his grandfather was waiting for him somewhere on Beacon Street, I think it was. And he was all excited, and he was actually a bandit that first year. He won't say that. He'll say, he always said, I was too young to be official. That's how he says it. And he crashed. He sort of didn't prepare well, and he stopped right about the cemetery area and didn't finish. This is the area that you usually bonk. You hear the wall, all that kind of things. On average, the body has enough stored energy for about 20 miles on average. I'm being real simplistic. A marathoner will carbo load the pastas and the potatoes and things days leading into a marathon to get you through the rest of the race. So everyone hits the wall, whether you're an elite athlete or any other kind of athlete. It's just different degrees of when you go from your natural store of energy into that carbo loading, which turns into glycogen that pushes your leg. And it's usually around this area, depending again on a lot of factors, of when that'll come in. It's basically if you're driving down a hill in your car in neutral, and when the hill ends and it becomes level, you put it into gear. You want to do it very smoothly so it doesn't even stutter step. You want to do that as a runner as well. And depending how you carbo loaded, how the weather was, how you ran, whatever. So Dave's first year, he bumped right about here near the cemetery and didn't finish. He felt really bad because he let down his grandfather. And he said, don't worry about it. Next year, I'll be at the same spot. You'll learn from your mistake. I'll see you then. Well, unfortunately, his grandfather died before the next Boston Marathon. So Dave ran it in his honor, and again, around this time, he stopped, couldn't continue. And he's sitting on the curb right around the corner, and then he realized where he was. He turned around at Evergreen Cemetery, and that's where his grandfather's buried. So every year since then, he still runs this marathon, but he runs it after everybody else. He pays his respects to his grandfather. He goes in there. Every year he runs. He usually starts around 2:30 or 3 now. He'll make sure everything's going off, doing everything well, does his job, goes to Hopkinton with some state troopers, and he'll run the marathon, and he usually finishes in the dark, 10 or 11, depending when he started. He's always on TV. I go, how do you know where the TV cameras are? He goes, I don't know, it just happens. But he'll pay respects to his grandfather, which I always think is neat. It's just a tough stretch. There's no spectators on the left. There's the green line just starting. If you look over, runners who dropped out, you'll see them wearing the Mylar silver blankets, so you kind of run like this because you don't want to be, especially if it's raining or really bad, you don't want to be tempted. So you come down here to Chestnut Hill Ave, and you take a left onto Beacon Street at Cleveland Circle. I took this so you know where the tracks are, because the tracks are kind of tough right around here. If it's wet, you can actually slip, but for wheelchair athletes, they really have to approach it in a certain way. One year, Jean Driscoll, who was going for her record win, was in second place behind Louise Savage right about here, and she wanted to cut on the inside of her to sort of maybe get a lead, but by doing that, her wheels lined up with the track, and she just flipped up, and now she's sitting on a chair looking straight up. It happens. And she's like, They asked her after, she goes, it happens, I'm an athlete. She corrected herself, continued on. Not funny to her, but Patty Dillon was coming down here, and back in the 70s and 80s, there was no real crowd control, no fencing. You've seen all the photos of Bill Rogers, who can basically touch the spectators it's like the Tour de France. You ever see that on TV, where they have a camera on the leader of the Tour de France, and the spectators sort of separate as they rides through. It was kind of like that. They had some police on horses keeping spectators. That was about it. So Patty Dillon from Quincy, at the time Patty Lyons or Catalano, forget what year, she changed. She came in second place in 1979, 1980. So she's a local runner. We want her to win. So 1981, she's got to be the favorite again. Back then, again, it was a noontime start, so men and women together. So the lead women, you had to really see your competitor. It's different now, we can all together. So she's coming down here, and she's about to take a left onto Beacon, and she looks around to see who's in second, who was Allison Rowe, how close she was. You got a couple miles to go. And she turned around, and at the same time, at this turn, one of the police horses stepped back into the crowd, into the runners, and she smacked right into the hindquarters of a horse. And Allison Rowe kind of went right around. And Patty came in second for a third year in a row. But I got to know Patty over the year, and I said, I got to ask you, even though it was the hindquarters of a horse, you're not hitting a wall. I said, what did it feel like hitting the horse? And she goes, it was like hitting a wall. She goes, I don't care if it's muscle and everything. It was just, I slammed in. The horse is basically like, And Tom Dadarian, who's the coach of Greater Boston Track Club, he and a couple other runners were around Patty. And so when Patty hit the horse, she fell back off her feet, and they kind of caught her before she fell, hit the ground, and sort of picked her back up. And she's like, for the next mile going down Beacon Street, I said, how was that? She goes, you ever see those Bugs Bunny movies where they get hit in the head and it's stars? She goes, I saw stars. She basically got a concussion doing that. And so she's running for like another half mile, just like not even knowing where she was. And again, the horse didn't even care. I told that story a couple of years ago, and in the back was Coach Squires, some Greater Boston runners, Patty Dillon and her husband Dan, who one of our greatest cross-country runners out of Providence College. As I'm telling the story, I'm looking in the back, and Dan is just like laughing. And Patty goes, I mean, she's okay with it, but she's just kind of funny. So I asked her afterwards, I said, how'd that go? And Dan goes, I always love this story. Patty, I want to hear it. I said, so how's that car ride home? Dan goes, yeah, I got to stop doing that. Patty goes, Dan, it's your wife. We weren't married at that time. She goes, still. I put this in because one of the reasons for qualifying standards was people like this back in the 70s. Will Cloney, the race director, Coach Squires, and a couple other people were really worried about the integrity of the race because you'd had people in, like he would say, Superman outfits who would run for 10 miles and stop. People from the different colleges would run and get picked up with their car with their buddies, and it was turning into a joke. So they incorporated, for 1970, the first qualifying standard was you had to prove you could run under 4 hours, or a 20-miler under 3-something, because there weren't that many marathons then, believe it or not. And then they increased qualifying standards to the fun, rolling standards that you enjoy now. But you still see it. Like here's a unicorn from last year, actually, the logo of the BAA near the finish. I put this in personally with the hamburgers, cheeseburgers, ketchup, and mustard, because these guys beat me one year. My brother was at the finish line, and he goes, that cheeseburger beat you. I'm like, shut up, you're not running. He goes, it's very disheartening. Just ignore the pain, ignore the noise. If you see a hamburger pass you, they're good runners, but it's a hamburger. I mean, come on. As a runner, as a spectator, it's pretty funny to see. That's why I took it. But as a runner, you're like, oh, you're kidding me. But it's still fun. Now, Brighton, you only get like a 5K to go, which is great. But I always tell runners on Beacon Street here, some races, a lot of them can be won or lost on this with the elites, because there's still rolling hills on Beacon Street until you get to the Kenmore Square sign. And I remember asking Dave McGilvery, I said, well, how high are the hills? He goes, well, you can see the skyline. I go, no, you can't. Again, I always wear a hat with a visor, and because of the sun and everything. I said, no, you can't. He goes, yeah, Paul, look up once, you can see it. Because when you run up a hill, you sort of tilt forward as a runner. So one year I did, I kind of looked up, and hey, there's the skyline. There's the Hancock and the Peru. I'm going, ooh. It's good and bad. It's good because, hey, I'm only 3 miles away. There's my goal. But you're bad because I'm this high that I can see the skyline. So it kind of gives you a sense of, all right, only 3 miles, but keep it together still as a runner. Also being Brookline, I did a story for a magazine about the wreaths that the winners get, which are made in Greece and flown over, how that tradition started and everything. And I ended up interviewing Governor Dukakis, who still works at Northeastern. And he's from Brookline. When he was a high school student, he ran Boston in 3:31, which is pretty good. And he said right around here, his wife Kitty, they weren't married at the time, but Kitty told him he gave him a glass of water, because there was like a Brigham's or something around here that had water. There was no water stations back then. when he ran it. So gave him a glass of water. And I said, what a great story. Because this is your future wife giving you water in your hometown. He goes, Paul, I don't remember. He leaned in and goes, I don't remember her giving me, I don't know if she gave me water. I can't remember that. I said, is she thinking about someone else? She said, no. He goes, if Kitty says she gave me water, she gave me water. And he goes like this, he goes, key to a happy marriage, Paul. If she said that she gave me water. So it's a sweet story. I mean, think about it. They're in high school, sweethearts doing that. I always think of that when I run through the Brookline area. But these hills, though, they are rolling, and they'll work on your legs, too, a little bit more. Because you figure after you get through BC, you've done all the highlights, right? You've done Wellesley. You've gone through the Heartbreak Hill. You've gone all the, the big things. But no, you got to keep it in check still, even though it's only 3 miles. All right, this one I put up. See if you can guess. This is on the course. See if anyone can guess why I put this photo in the book and why this is important. Anybody have any guesses? Don't overthink it. Boston. The only place in the entire Boston Marathon course that says Boston is this right here. There's no big silver signs like I've been showing you, entering Wellesley and everything, right? And this is actually parallel to you, so it's not even St. Mary Street's actually facing you. This is about a half mile before the Mass Pike overpass on Beacon Street, right? Getting close, give you an idea. So right there is the only, because you're only in Boston less than a mile and a half for the course, Boston proper. And down here is the line, and back in, it was 1899, the winner who ended up winning, the leader who ended up winning the race, there was cobblestones, and he tripped over it and scraped his knees. He ended up winning, but like his welcome to Boston was like a face plant on Beacon Street. There's no cobblestones now. Every year I ran, I was looking for this, and I missed it. I had to drive to get this photo. I go, where is this sign? Because by the time you get to the church or the overpass, you've gone by it, and I've always wanted to see it, and also for the book. So it's, unless they put a new one there, which I don't think they have, it's just a little sign. It's parallel to you. You actually have to look over your right to see it, to let you know what marathon you're running. This is 1 mile to go in Kenmore Square with Ronald McDonald looking at you, although he's not there now. This is the 100th, 1996. The Rosie Ruiz start over here. The bus station's a little different over here now, I think. They reconfigured the overhang and everything, so that looks a little different, but basically the same. And here's your finish, like those little thumbtacks on Google. There it is. So, and the bridge here has the Boston Strong sign that they put. It's really awesome. So unless you have like a broken leg or something, I don't care how bad you feel, when you go over 128, the Mass Pike overpass and get to Kenmore Square, you're going to finish and you're going to feel great. You may feel horrible as soon as you cross over the finish line. But this last mile, everything you've done for a year, for whatever you've trained, for whatever the sacrifices you've made, this is your reward if you haven't enjoyed it already. This is when you can sort of finally go, okay, no more hills other than the one under Mass Ave, which I hate. And you just push yourself. Your family's going to be there. Don't forget there's a photographer at the finish line. Get you paid. Everything is in your head. You start to enjoy more on this last mile. It's amazing. It's an adrenaline rush. This is an older one, obviously, 20 years ago. Since the bombings, they will never have bunting like this because they want a clear sight down Boylston. But I just like the way the colors are, the whole color scheme, the old mat, little clock that's down there, one guy in a photo bridge. But I kind of like this, just the way the color. But that's the finish line of it. You'll see this when you turn on to Boylston from Hereford. You'll see the yellow and blue. It's like 5 or 6 blocks away. You'll see it. It's an amazing feeling as a runner or a family member who's supporting you, that everything you've strived for and running, you'll feel it on Boylston Street. The cheers echo because of the buildings. It's just amazing. And everyone's been there probably as long as you, platooning back and forth from the bars, so they're really excited and happy. So it's amazing to see that. The finish line, actually, Dave McGilvey always jokes that he's the only marathon he knows that paints the finish line after the race, which he does. On Wednesday after the race, they actually paint the finish line for tourism remainder of the year. He never paints it for the race because the race has this nice latex thing. In the old days, it was just a painted line in front of the Pru or something like that, but in recent decades, if you notice, you never see it. It's just this. The early version of these things were kind of dangerous. There was a race in Chicago that Robert Chariot, who had won Boston, went over the Chicago Marathon latex thing and slipped and fell back and got a concussion because it was very slick. It didn't absorb moisture. Yeah, very ouch. It's better now. It's more porous. It can pick up sweat or if it's rain or anything. These are much better. The runners come from the right to the left. If you're a runner, you may know why, but do you know why this is the way it's flipped around, that you can't, as a runner, read the word finish? Your picture. There's a photo bridge here of photographers taking pictures of you. So if a runner, if you're coming from the right and you can read the word finish, your photo is going to be the other way. So this way, when you get your little proof in the mail or email, you can read the word finish. So it's kind of neat. People don't remember, or don't, if they're not really focusing on that. And I was talking to Dave about different markings, because I'm a race director myself, so when I get my race certified, the map has markings and everything. There's markings, little nails everywhere, stuff on the building. There's marks everywhere this entire course to verify what the mileages are, especially the finish line. Even though it's been adjusted here and there, they know exactly where everything is. That little overpass over the Mass Pike in the 50s, unrelated to the marathon, the city, if you remember driving over years ago, you would approach the overpass and kind of have to go on an angle to get to Kenmore Square. Well, the city straightened it out, how it is now. You basically drive right over it straight. Well, the BEA noticed in the 50s that everyone's time for about 4 years was really good. So they thought to remeasure the course, and when the city straightened that bridge out, they dropped about 160 or 90 yards. So the course for about 5 or 6 years was short, just because they did that. So they measure it much better now. This is the 50s. I'll end on this, but I'll keep this up for a little while, tell a few things. This is Boylston Street. There's the finish line. Boston Public Library, Exeter Street. There's the fire station here to get your bearings. So you run up here, and then you turn onto Hereford Street, and you come up Boylston. This is Newbury Street, Comm Ave's over here. In the old days, the runners would come up Comm Ave and come down Exeter Street and finish here, the real old days. So behind the library was the oval I was telling you about, Irvington Street Oval, the BEA Clubhouse. All those photos that you saw that Johnny Kelly's win and the Lenox Hotel was behind them, it was because they were here, not over here. So they went down Exeter Street here. From 1965 to 1985, the finish line was up here. So the runners would come down Boylston Street and go on what was called Ring Road. It was basically an extension. Ring Road actually goes down to the Weston here. But there was an extension here, so the runners would finish right in the cement patio. So again, 65 to 85, all the Bill Rogers, Joan Benoit, Samuelsons, all those wins, those photos were right here. And then they go into the garage, and the winners would be interviewed in a barber shop at the Prudential. They'd be sitting on barber chairs being interviewed. Talk how low tech that was. So in 1985, the BEA was finally acquiesced to getting sponsorship money. They were way behind New York and Chicago and stuff. So they finally made a deal with John Hancock, who would give them $1 zillion to be the principal sponsor, but John Hancock said, don't cash the check until you move the finish line from in front of our competitor, the Prudential, to closer to the tower. So BEA goes, okay, we'll do that. So they moved it down here, which then they had to adjust the start. So the starting line's been roughly the same, within a few yards on that main street. So then for 1986 marathon, it was down here, give or take, and we had prize money. First International really started getting on the map in front of the Boston Public Library here. Again, it's been adjusted here and there, but nothing that big. But that gives you the final stretch. I used to work for Hancock, and I took this from 500 feet up somewhere to get the whole thing. So that's pretty neat. I always like this photo. And this is I'll close with the thought from a runner that we have a love-hate relationship with these 3 or 4 blocks, because you've been training again for a year, and you've annoyed your spouse if they're not running again. You forgot your kids. You've done this. You've run through lunches. You want to just get this thing over with because you've run 26.2 miles and you want to rest and everything. However, you also want to soak it in as much as you can. So unless you're a leader of the race, do you run this really fast to get it over with? Do you run it slower to soak up all? It's a love-hate. It's a weird stretch right there. Because once you cross the finish line, it's it. You go under a bridge, you get your medal, you water, you go to the family. So it's a weird section here. The whole year of your life or whatever is right here to celebrate. That's how I felt. So it's like, do you go fast? It's a weird love-hate thing. So it depends how you feel. If you're really not feeling that well, you want to go fast to get it over with. But it's rewarding no matter what. It'll stay in you forever and ever, no matter if you've done it once or a million times. It's just an amazing, like I said, all these buildings here just echo all the crowds. And they're always here. It's always full. It's always full, so it's amazing no matter when you finish. And I've gone from finishing in 3:40 something to 7 hours and something, and there's always people. It's awesome. I love it. So if anyone has any questions about anything, I don't know if I did it too fast or anything. Yep.
What impact, if any, does equipment improvements have on the number of people who finish and how quickly the race is run?
Equipment like sneakers, running shoes for runners, those kind of things. Well, with the new shoes that just came, it depends how. It does affect performance. Because if I ran today with what Johnny Kelly ran in 1935, I'd run slower. He ran with leather flats that he took the track shoes, he took the spikes off and ran with that. So the jump from what Johnny Kelly wore to rubber-soled running shoes, was there a big outcry of that jump? Was there a huge difference with that jump? So the jump from the rubber-soled running shoes to what Nike with the Vapors, is there a huge difference? To a degree, but it affects. I mean, if you run barefoot, are you going to run as fast as somebody with any kind of running shoes? So it does affect performance. It depends to what degree for the leaders. That's what they're still looking into. I assume that's what you're referring to, yeah. So it does affect. It's what you're wearing. You know, it affects if you're wearing 5 layers of clothes or a singlet, right? Whatever you have affects you. It affects you if you're drinking Gatorade with water or just water. With Gatorade will replace supplements. So it all affects it. It's just what's in that degree that's acceptable with the governing body. In golf, look at the golf clubs. I mean, the old days with Francis, we met in Brookline, his day was wooden clubs. Or the old tennis with the wooden outside, now they have the fiberglass. Sure, it's quantum from that decade to that decade, so each governing body of the sport has to say what's allowable. And the technology is sort of ahead of that right now in running. Yeah. Anyone else? Yeah.
I have lunch with a guy who is in a medical group. He runs the tent at Cleveland Circle for the runners. And when it's hot, they have a tub filled with ice cubes and water. Yeah. And when the runners come in and they get temperatures above 100, 102, 104, they just dump them into the bath.
Yeah.
Cool them off.
I got an interesting story, not Boston, well, sort of related. Falmouth Road Race book in 1979. Bertil Salazar almost died from heat. He had a temperature of 108, and when he finished, he passed out. And give credit to the Falmouth Road Race people, this is in the early 70s, and I had researched that only 2 years earlier, the medical journals mentioned about ice baths, only 2 years earlier. And Falmouth had done this before that. So when Salazar passed out, I remember interviewing him for the book, and he was telling me he can't remember the last 2 miles. At about 4 miles, he tried to catch Bill Rogers right in front of him, and he said, I couldn't catch up, and I was confused. I go, what do you mean you're confused? He goes, why can't I? I trained with him. I'm with Greater Boston. I'm younger than him, so I should, you know, and he was not getting any oxygen to the brain. He knows now. But as he's running, he just doesn't remember the last 2 miles. And there's a photo of him that Charlie Rogers took, Bill's brother, that you can just see how gaunt he is. And he was passed by 4 people just that last stretch of Falmouth to the finish. So he crossed the finish line, and the medical people you could see them. So they had these little kiddie pools. They're different now, but little kiddie pools of ice, and they grabbed him, they threw him in that. And he was combative, which is another sign of the heat stroke and everything. And they had to bring his body temperature down, and Al's father, Jose, was there going, take him to the hospital, which is like 2 miles away. And the doctor said, no, we take him to the hospital now, he's dead. Because we have to bring his body temperature down to take him to the hospital. And the father even had, he grabbed some tongue depressors, made into a cross, and had him look at it to focus. And then the priest came, gave him last rites. It was a bad scene with Al. And they finally got him to the hospital, Salazar, and he got like a bunch of liters of fluid. He actually came back for the award ceremony with the gauze badge in his hand, kind of like telling people, you know, you beat me now, and you know, for the next 3 years he was untouchable. But that's just how he ran. So that's something that is amazing, to bring your body temperature down, because your core can just, you know, go. When you run anyway, your body temperature goes up about 20 degrees. Add it being 80 or 90, add how fast you're running, how you're pushing it. So doing something simple like that which you may not think would work. Isn't it?
The highest temperature he measured was 106.
Yeah. Al had 108. And if you tell Al, he'll go, yeah, I won another race. He was just that way. That's how he ran.
I was actually about 40 feet from Al when they dumped him.
Oh, were you?
Yeah.
Oh, you might be in the picture. Yeah, he was like in 5th or 6th at the top of the hill.
Right.
And by time, which was like maybe 300 yards, he finished. Greg Meyer was the last person who passed him. And I actually asked Greg about that. And he goes, yeah, I'm behind Al. And he's like waving back and forth. And Al's a pretty good runner straight ahead. He's just going back and forth. He doesn't even remember. It's amazing what the body can do. He cannot, for the book was maybe 2 years ago. He still could not remember the last 2 miles, yet the body took him over that last 2 miles. It's amazing what the body can do. He should have stopped, but that's what you do. Yeah, did you feel the heat too? I mean, it was a horrible day.
Oh, it was horrible. I
Yeah.
actually had stopped, and I got in a ride down.
Yeah,
And I actually made about 4 or 5 miles. I'm like, I'm done.
yeah.
And I just happened to get to the line right, maybe a couple minutes after him. And he's an old friend, so.
Yeah, it was a bad
The
scene.
words that came out of his mouth
Yeah.
when they dumped him for a nice Catholic boy.
Yeah, yeah. You get very combative. That's a sign that lets the doctors know that, well, see, he did something stupid. He didn't run his race if I digress, at the starting line, because Al and Rogers and them were great at Boston, but once the gun goes off, you're on your own, obviously. You're not going to give it to somebody else. So Al looked up to Bill. There was a few years difference. So Coach Squires saw that and told Bill Rogers, when you stretch, you drink your water, go behind the building, go behind the tree. Not telling him why, but you do that so other guys don't see what you're doing. Well, Al didn't see that. So when they get to the first mile, Bill's all hydrated. He skips the water station. So Salazar goes, well, Bill didn't take water. I won't take water. Gets to mile 2, same thing. But he didn't hydrate like he. Dan Dillon said he remembers the lighthouse at mile 1 and the ambulance. It was just a horrible day. But yeah, you got to run within, Any other questions? Yep.
When did the marathon change from being a small handful of runners to what it is today? Because I live on the 50-yard line. I grew up with the marathon.
Mm.
And I tell people that it would take about a minute or two to watch the marathon.
Yeah.
As I remember, 1955 would be the police fore and aft on motorcycles, and that corps of runners.
Mm.
Johnny Kelly the elder, Johnny Kelly the younger,
Yeah.
would be going through. And my sense is that the runners were under 100.
Yeah.
And I was friendly with one of that core group. He was telling me, it was interesting, how tight the runners were.
Mm.
They all knew each
Yeah,
other.
they all knew each other. There's only like 4 marathons then. There was Boston, Yonkers, Culver City, and one other. There's only like 4 marathons for the longest time, and they used that for the Olympic trials too.
And I want to say that it was less than 100
Yeah.
runners in 1955.
Yeah, it didn't reach 1,000 until the late 60s. It didn't reach, well, the first year I ran in 1990, there was 9,000,
Yeah.
and that's 1990. What really changed it, well, it depends what jump you want to point to. But-
As I say,
yeah.
I remember just how few runners there were.
Yeah,
How quickly you could watch the race, how the traffic was going within a few seconds after they had passed.
yeah.
And just a very, very few, and of course, at that time, running was not a popular sport.
No.
It became popularized 70s on.
And they're so close together because they all ran roughly the same time. Now you have people between 2 hours and 10 to 7, so 5-hour difference, give or take waves and everything. But back then, most of the guys trained together, did the same kind of training, whatever limited it was. So there were groups that were together normally running. That was, like I said, 1990, it was probably the running boom of the 70s, where it started to jump to 4,000 or 5,000, which was a lot back then. I mean, Falmouth had a cap in 1980, even though it's not a marathon, In 1980, they had a cap of 5,000 runners. We can't do anymore. Now it's up to 13,000. But it started to grow with the running boom. So for the hundredth, they went from, I think it was 12 or 15,000 was the most, something like that, mid-teens, to 38,000 in 1996. Right. But as far as the jumps like that, yeah, so back then, there weren't that many.
I can remember maybe 65, 70
Mm.
would run in the race, and attended athletic. It was probably the purest
Yeah.
athletic event that there ever was, because the prize was the wreath and the honor of having won a cross.
Right. And beef stew. And, yeah, but you get beef stew. And Amy Burford, who won in 1968, was a vegetarian, so he didn't even have the beef stew.
One other question. John Miles, back in the 20s, from Cape Breton Island, he, I understand, showed up for the race. He had never run more than 10 miles in his life. He borrowed a pair of sneakers, a pair of shorts, and I guess it was a Finn or a Swede that year who was the expected
Mm.
winner. And he won. Were there any other runners that just got into the race on a whim and won?
Not on a whim. Back then, there were marathoners who won Boston who you wouldn't think, because they're all amateurs, they had jobs. Like the Clarence Amars and those guys you would know because they had sort of a history. There were more situations back then because it wasn't organized, no sponsors, nothing. It was a race. It was another race to them. And again, like I said, up until the 50s, there's only a couple of hundred runners. So it was very small, and they didn't go all over the country to run marathons. They just did this. A couple of them wanted to go for the Olympics, like Clarence Amar, to qualify, so they would go to one of those things. But yeah, it was just like it was another race, and it wasn't a big thing for them. There was no women, so it was just a bunch of guys running with, back in the old days, they'd have cyclists running with you and water, little carriages with water going with you, kicking up the dirt, which I'm sure they loved it because it wasn't paved back then. I can't remember of anyone like out of nowhere, like a Rudy type thing that would do it back then. But if you read stories back then, there'll be guys, oh, wow, you knew everybody, but I didn't think this guy would do it. Bill Rogers was pretty close to that in that we knew him here, but you could see his progression to possibly winning in 1975, because 1973, he dropped out. 1974, he came in 14th, so you could see the marathons in between, a progression. So he didn't really technically was out of nowhere, but from someone from a different state who's competing goes, who's this guy? Kind of thing. So, yeah, I don't see any way back when. Yeah. Mm. There are some people who can do that for a first year, and then the body kind of catches up. Yeah. Yeah. There are some that have done that training-wise, yeah. Yeah. No, he was good. He won twice. Any other questions? Well, I'll be here hanging out. I love talking about running, so if you have any other questions you just think of, Falmouth or otherwise, or just want to chat or anything, I can sign anyone's books for you too, so I'll be here for the duration. And I appreciate you coming out. Thanks. Well, I remember when I would walk up Heartbreak Hill like in 2012, I got yelled at, like worse than my parents as a kid, to keep going. And depending on your state of mind, you will accept it. I mean, yelled at, like get off your, and I had to walk up that. A big thing I know that is if you have family members out there, it's easier for the runner to find you than for you to find the runner. So tell your friend or whatever where you're going to be. Because to a spectator, we're just a sea of runners. But to us, you're stationary. You're going to be next to the light post, the store. We can find you much easier if we know where you are. So that's because you don't want to miss that, And if your family's there, stop. Don't just run by and wave. Take a second and stop. They've been waiting there for a couple hours. Say hi, get your selfie, do what you want, and then go, unless you're the first or second finisher. But yeah, that's the big thing like that. Yeah, tell the runner, because people don't remember, I'll see him. It's my son. I'll see him. No, I won't. So that's a big thing. Yeah, just yelling and cheering. Even those bells that you hate giving to the kids in the mall, but just anything. We love it. It just pushes us. At the very least, takes us off our mind of any aches or pains we have.
It's very exciting.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you for coming tonight. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.